This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are interviewing the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
The rabbi stated in a previous video that it is permissible for women to wear tefillin. Some argue that you have ignored the decisions of the Halachic authorities of recent centuries. How does the rabbi respond?
In order to relate to this question in a serious manner, I'm going to quote and explain certain Halachic and Talmudic sources. First of all, it is a fact that essentially all the rishonim, that is to say all the Halachic authorities of the medieval period, are unanimous that women may wear tefillin, and not just tefillin, but in fact that women may perform any mitzvah, any positive mitzvah, any mitzvah aseh, from which they are exempt. They may nevertheless perform such a mitzvah. This I already stated in the earlier interview, and I'm going to now elaborate a little bit on this point. The one exception to this statement that I just made, that all rishonim are agreed on this issue, is a statement quoted in a book known as the Kolbo in the name of Ram. Ram is apparently a reference to Maharami Rothenburg, the famous halachic authority of the early 13th, late 12th, 13th and early 14th century, I should say. In this book, the Kolbo, he is quoted, the Maharam is quoted as saying that if women wish to wear tefillin, we should not allow them to do so. And the reason given is that, seeing that when one wears tefillin, one must behave in a certain way, and amongst other things, one is not allowed to break wind, pass gas when wearing tefillin, because tefillin are like a mini Sefer Torah, a small Torah scroll that one wears on one's body. For this reason, women should not be allowed to wear tefillin, because they cannot be trusted to behave appropriately and not do so. This statement, it should be mentioned, first of all, being claimed and stated in the name of, attributed to Maharami Rothenburg, is not quoted by any other source. That is to say, the Tur, the Rosh, and many other Ashkenazim rishonim who, as a rule, quote the Maharami Rothenburg frequently, they mention no such thing in his name. That itself is somewhat surprising, and therefore perhaps allows one to wonder whether in fact the Maharam made such a statement. Second of all, whether they heard of this statement or not, these other rishonim such as the Rosh, the Tur, the fact is they did not quote it. So even if they heard of this claim, of this statement by Maharam, they clearly rejected it. It does not make sense to claim that they would have agreed with this position, but simply have omitted to mention it. Beyond that, it should be stated up front that this idea, this notion, that women cannot be relied upon to know how to behave when wearing tefillin, and what one may and one may not do when wearing tefillin, this idea is not mentioned anywhere by Chazal. It is not mentioned in the Talmud or the Mishnah or any other source from the time of Chazal. In fact, in the writings of Chazal we find the opposite. We find in the Talmud Bavli, in Masechet Eruvin, Daf Tzadi Vav, we find the explicit statement that some women, such as Michal Bat Kushi, wore tefillin, and the sages in no way castigated or reproached her for this. It is true that in the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechet Berachot, Perek Bet Halacha Gimel, it is true that this opinion is quoted there as well, and then on the heels of that opinion there follows a dissenting view in the name of one particular Chacham, in other words, a minority view, who disagrees. But the reason for disagreeing is not as given in the name of Maharam, that it has something to do with women being responsible and understanding how one should behave when wearing tefillin. That is not the reason at all. The implication from that statement in the Talmud Yerushalmi in the name of that minority opinion, and as it is understood by many of the Mefarshim, is that it has to do with another general, more wide-ranging discussion, and that is the famous sugya of Nashim Samechot Reshut, which in simple terms means, without going into all the details, this means that there is a discussion amongst the Chachamim going back to very early times whether women should perform mitzvot from which they are exempt, from which they are peturot. The halacha, according to the majority of poskim, is that Nashim Samechot Reshut, which means that women may perform such mitzvot if they wish to. And on the basis of the Talmud's statement in Eruvin Daf Tzadi Vav, we have a list of rishonim who state explicitly that women may perform any mitzvah taseh, any positive mitzvah from which they are peturot, from which they are exempt, if they so wish. This is the view of the Rambam in Ilchot Tzitzit Perek Gimel. This is the view of the Meiri on the Gemara mentioned. This is also the view of the Rashba, as quoted in the Orhot Hayim Ilchot Tefillin Siman Gimel, that the Rashba was of the view that women may perform any such mitzvah and also make the relevant bracha, as I mentioned in the earlier interview. And this is also the clear implication of the Ritba on that Gemara in Eruvin, where he says that the Talmud Bavli expresses this view that women may wear tefillin and also may make the bracha. So we are dealing with a situation where not only, according to the common wisdom, which, as many of you may know, I do not necessarily agree with, but nevertheless the common wisdom is that the halacha should always follow the Talmud Bavli over the Talmud Yerushalmi. Here we are dealing with a situation not only where the Talmud Bavli says plainly that women may perform any mitzvah, even and specifically referring to tefillin as such a mitzvah that they may perform. The Talmud Yerushalmi, it cannot be said about the Talmud Yerushalmi that it actually disagrees with this position. The general opinion of the Talmud Yerushalmi is in line with what it says in the Talmud Bavli, and it is only a dissenting minority view mentioned in the Talmud Yerushalmi which expresses a different position, and not for the reason quoted by some latter-day poskim. So, according to normal, standard operating procedure in the realm of halacha, most people would always assume the halacha should be like the Talmud Bavli, just as the Ritba and the Rashba and the Rambam and the Meiri did. And therefore, far from being necessary for me to explain why I hold this position, the question, in fact, should be reversed. Those who have taken issue, perhaps, with what I said in the previous interview about women being allowed to wear tefillin, I understand this was discussed in certain blogs. I think someone mentioned to me a blog by the name, I think, of Torah Musings, that this position is somehow contrary to halacha. In fact, the question should be reversed. Why do those who have taken issue with what I said, why do they here simply, as it were, forget their usual position that the halacha should follow the Talmud Bavli, and here they wish to be posek halacha, they wish to decide the halacha according to a minority opinion in the Talmud Yerushalmi, and an opinion which is quoted only by one halachic source in the time of the rishonim, and even that is somewhat dubious for the reasons mentioned. There are other issues here as well that we must address. The claim that women are simply not to be trusted when wearing tefillin for the reasons mentioned, that they may break wind whilst wearing tefillin, I find this statement to be, frankly, quite outrageous. The suggestion that women are somehow so irresponsible and lacking in understanding and awareness and cannot be made to understand such things, I find this very insulting to women. It's a clear statement implying disparagement and a lack of respect towards women. And as I mentioned, this is not at all mentioned by the Chachamim, by Chazal. In fact, from the words of Chazal, we can infer the opposite. In the Gemara, in Masechet Eruvin Tzadi Vav Amud Bet, it mentions there the view that if a person finds tefillin lying around on the street on Shabbat, and one wishes, of course, to bring them into a house or to a more proper place for tefillin. Tefillin should not be lying around on the street or in the field. Seeing that one cannot carry them on Shabbat, one can put them on and wear them and then bring them into the city, the town, one's house, etc. And according to an opinion mentioned there in the Talmud, men and women can do this equally. And it doesn't really matter for our purposes whether the halacha is that women can also do this just as men can, although there is no clear halachic statement to the opposite effect. The fact that such an opinion is voiced in the Baraita, in the Talmud, that a woman may also wear tefillin in order to bring them in from a situation where they are not treated with respect, etc. That fact shows that women may wear tefillin. If it were true that women cannot be trusted to wear tefillin and behave in an appropriate manner, then this would not be possible. Furthermore, the very fact that we find in the Talmud, in Eruvin Sarivav Mud Aleph, which by the way is based on an earlier source in the Mechilata, the end of Parashat Bo, where it states that Michal Bat Kushi wore tefillin and was not reproached by the Chachamim for doing so. The very fact that it says that this was the case, and that the Talmud does not mention, that Mechilata does not mention, and the Talmud does not mention that this is problematic because women cannot be trusted to wear tefillin. The very fact that this is not mentioned by these early Chazalic sources shows that this is not an issue at all. And the suggestion that this is the problem, or there is such an issue with women wearing tefillin, is a very unusual thesis, to put it mildly, which needs to be substantiated, and there is no substantiation for it. Furthermore, I would add that even if one could somehow make the case that many centuries or even millennia ago, the reality regarding a majority of women in earlier times was such that they could not be trusted to behave properly with regards to something such as tefillin, I would strongly suggest that today the situation is very different. Today we find that many women, large numbers of women, are very interested in studying Torah, even though they are exempt from doing so. And rather than hearing voices in the Jewish world, in the Halachic world, that women should not study Torah, women in fact are today encouraged to study Torah, all manner of Torah, all areas of Torah. Even though there is an opinion mentioned in Masechet Sotah by Rabbi Eliezer that a person should not teach his daughter Torah. And the Rambam quotes this at the end of Hilchot Talmud Torah Perek Aleph, and the Rambam explains that the reason for this is because most women will misunderstand and will twist what they learn, and it will end up being a negative exercise rather than a positive one. Even if this were once true, we see today that this is not the case. And even if there was some truth to this rather unusual claim that women are somehow not to be trusted with regards to Tefillin, I would say that this situation has also changed radically. And I very much wonder whether it is generally known by, in many circles, by many Jews, that the reason that some rabbis claim, and the reason that the Rama and the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Lamed Het, claims that women should not be allowed to wear tefillin is for the reason mentioned, that they are somehow not in control of their bodily functions or cannot be trusted to be in such control. I think that many people, men and women, would find this a rude surprise to know that this is the reason why some rabbis claim that women should not be allowed to wear tefillin. So in fact, the question needs to be reversed. Not why I claimed that according to Halacha and according to the rishonim, women may wear tefillin, something which is stated explicitly by Hazal, something which is stated in both Talmudim and by almost all the rishonim who discuss the matter. The question should be reversed. Why is it that certain people choose to relinquish their usual halachic principles and their usual approach in order, in this case, to support the opinion that women may not wear tefillin? The question can also be addressed at the Rama himself. I, as opposed to some rabbis, do not work with an halachic agenda. By that I mean that it is true, I do not attempt to deny this for one moment, it is true that I do not feel that any serious halachic authority is required to necessarily accept the view of any particular posek. In this case, if we're speaking about the Rama, one is not required to accept the position of the Rama. The question can and should be asked, why did the Rama choose to quote this statement by the called by the name of the Ram, Haram apparently, Mi Rothenburg, that women should not be allowed to wear tefillin? Why did he choose to quote this opinion when the vast majority of the rishonim clearly and openly disagree with this view? The Bet Yosef, for example, who was aware of this opinion, he quotes it in the Bet Yosef, does not mention it in Shulchan Aruch. In other words, he rejected this view. It is most unusual that the Rama would have mentioned this view, particularly in view of the fact that the Rama himself, in Siman Tal Kof Peitet in Chot Rosh Hashanah, is posek that women may perform mitzvot. They are exempt from performing, and in fact may also make the bracha. So the Rama's psak halacha on many levels is very problematic. I therefore wonder how some people will respond when people have been made aware of these halachic facts, how they will respond to these questions. A, why are they choosing to follow a minority opinion in the Talmud Yerushalmi against the Talmud Bavli, where no discussion, no argument exists? B, why did the Rama follow such a methodology? C, why do they disparage women in this way by adopting this position, which we're not required to adopt or accept? Chazal did not make such a statement, and in fact made several statements which imply something very different. So for all these reasons, not only do I not feel that I have to retract anything that I said regarding women wearing tefillin, I think it is those who have taken issue with what I said, I think it is for them to explain why they insist on this particular point of view. What exactly is their agenda? For the record, I wish to add that I have never suggested or recommended to any woman that she wear tefillin. Women are not required to wear tefillin. However, if a woman is serious and for the right reasons, with the right motivation, wishes to perform this mitzvat aseh or any other mitzvat aseh, and I was convinced that she's doing this for the right reasons and not for the wrong reasons, I would tell her that this is the halacha and you may do so, and I would not have any problem with such a thing at all. However, as I pointed out in the earlier interview, the so-called women of the wall cannot be, we cannot assume that their motivations are pure. Because of what we know about this group, and this apparently was also challenged by certain people in certain blogs, that what I said about the women of the wall in the previous interview was uncalled for or overstating the facts. I can only say in response that apparently these people are not fully aware of who the women of the wall are, who their leadership is, and what their agenda is. Wearing tefillin for these women, or at least for the vast majority of them, I'm not denying the possibility that there are a few sincere women amongst them, but the vast majority of them, and their insistence on wearing tefillin in a public manner, with which in essence I have no problem, but the fact that they insist on doing this in such a way is deliberately designed to cause a provocation, and it is part of their agenda. They too have an agenda, just as certain people have an agenda regarding why women should not wear tefillin. These women have an agenda why they should wear tefillin, and it's not because they are always interested in performing commandments written in the Torah from which they are exempt. It is because they wish to promote an agenda of gender equality, denying the differences in the talents and roles of men and women in the world, extreme feminism. These people support the homosexual, lesbian, transgender forums and lobby groups. You would be hard put to find amongst these people someone who does not believe that the fictitious Palestinian people, so-called, deserve a state at the expense of the Jewish homeland, etc., etc. These people are not coming to us with clean hands. And this also has to be kept in mind. And one has to know how to distinguish between the true halachic issue and the sources, and dealing with those sources in an intellectually honest manner, and not be agenda-driven on the one hand, on the other hand to be aware of other people's agendas, and to know when a woman who wishes to wear tefillin is sincere and is motivated for the best of reasons, and when some people are doing it for ulterior motives.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. And a word to our viewers. If you would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with Rabbi Bar-Hayim in honor or memory of a loved one, or if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.